The briefing room smelled like cold coffee and dry erase marker. Commander Whitlock stood at the head of the table with a tablet in one hand and a red stylus in the other, and he was already talking before the door finished closing behind her. The map on the screen showed a ravine, frozen walls, single corridor in, no corridor out unless the extraction bird held position for exactly 4 minutes at the north end, the kind of terrain that made experienced men go quiet. Tess Harlow did not go quiet. She studied the map the way she always studied terrain, not the route, but the edges, the shelves, the wind lines carved into the rock by decades of Alaskan freeze and thaw. She had been in that type of canyon before, not that canyon, that type. She noticed the overwatch marker on the southern rim had a name next to it. Her name. She also noticed Commander Whitlock had not looked at her once since she walked in. He was talking about insertion windows, about the asset at the objective, about the seal element moving in 2 staggered columns. His stylus moved across the screen. Route confirmed. Extraction window confirmed. Air support on standby. Then the stylus moved to the southern rim marker. 1 tap. The name disappeared. "We're pulling the overwatch slot," Whitlock said, still not looking at her. "Informal asset, not in the chain. Liability we don't need on a black op with this profile." Someone at the table shifted in their seat. Whitlock finally looked up. Not at Tess, at the room. "Ghost story with a rifle," he said. "We run clean." The Barrett M82 was leaning against the wall behind her. Nobody looked at it. Tess did not answer. She looked at the southern rim on the map, at the exact shelf where she would have positioned, and she memorized the angle. The room cleared in 11 minutes. Whitlock rolled up the physical backup, tucked the tablet under his arm, and walked out without a debrief. The other planners followed. One of them, a younger analyst, paused at the door, looked at the Barrett, looked at Tess, and then looked away. He did not say anything. That was its own kind of answer. Chief Petty Officer Dale Renner stayed. He was the senior enlisted on the SEAL element. 21 years. 2 combat deployments in terrain that looked nothing like this, and 4 in terrain that looked exactly like it. He had the kind of face that stopped giving things away around year 8, but his eyes still moved the way a field man's eyes move. Cataloguing, measuring, deciding. He stood next to her and looked at the map on the screen. Whitlock had left it up. The southern rim marker was still blank. "You know the ravine?" Renner asked. "I know the type," Tess said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she said, "it's better." Renner studied her for a moment. Not dismissive, not convinced either. The look of a man who had learned to separate what a room told him from what a situation actually was. He glanced at the Barrett. "Whitlock runs a clean brief," he said. It wasn't a defense. It was a fact delivered without warmth. "He runs a credentialed brief," Tess said. "Those aren't the same thing either." Renner didn't respond to that. He picked up his kit bag, slung it over one shoulder, and walked to the door. He stopped without turning around. "Insertion is at 0200, he said. "Southern Rim Road stays open until 0145. After that, command locks the perimeter." He left. Tess looked at the clock on the wall, then at the Barrett, then at the map, at the blank marker on the southern rim, at the frozen shelf of rock 40 meters above the ravine floor, where the wind would come in from the northwest at at a consistent 6 to 8 knots, cold and flat and absolutely predictable. She picked up the Barrett. She did not sign out. She reached the southern rim at 0120. The cold was physical, not weather cold, structural cold. The kind that comes up through rock and into bone and tells the body it is somewhere it was not designed to be. The temperature on the Alaskan high ground in February did not negotiate. It simply subtracted. Tess moved across the shelf in a low crawl, rifle slung, pack tight against her back, reading the ground the way her grandfather had taught her to read ground. Not by looking at it, but by moving through it, feeling where it gave and where it held, where the ice had a crust and where it had a throat. She found her position in 4 minutes. Flat shelf. Natural depression in the rock. Northwest wind arriving exactly where the map had told her it would. 6 knots. Cold. Honest. She unpacked the Barrett in the dark without a light. Her hands knew the sequence. Bolt. Bipod. Scope. She settled the rifle into the depression and looked through the glass at the ravine below. Black. Quiet. A thread of moonlight on the ice at the ravine floor. She pulled out the range card she had made in the briefing room, drawn on the back of a fuel requisition form, the only paper she had, and laid it flat beside the rifle. The southern rim to the ravine floor, 3,800 meters to the northern extraction point. She had calculated the drop, the wind compensation, the adjustment for altitude, written it in pencil, small and tight, the way her grandfather wrote lists for the winter. I have watched men laugh like that before. That particular laugh, the one that comes out when someone with rank decides a thing is already settled. I have never once seen it survive contact with the ground truth, not once. She settled in to wait. Below her, 23 men from SEAL Team 6 were moving through the dark towards the mouth of the ravine, following a route that had been confirmed by an intelligence source that, in 11 hours, would be revealed as a fabrication. She did not know that yet. She just knew the ravine. The first shot came from the eastern wall at 0314. Not a warning shot, not a probe, a coordinated opening, 3 positions, overlapping fields of fire, timed to catch the SEAL element at the narrowest point of the ravine corridor, where the frozen walls compressed the column to single file, and there was no lateral movement, no cover, no angle of retreat that did not expose a man's back to the position behind him. Renner went flat in the same second the echo hit. He had been in enough ambushes to know the difference between a contact and a kill box. This was a kill box. The geometry was deliberate. Someone had designed this specific corridor for this specific purpose, and the SEAL element had walked into it on a route confirmed by command 12 hours earlier. Contact east! Contact east! Multiple positions! The radio filled with voices layering over each other, call signs bleeding together, the sharp percussion of return fire mixing with the crack of incoming rounds off frozen rock. Renner pressed against the ravine wall and counted 3 positions on the east, at least 2 on the west, high ground on both sides. The extraction point was 900 meters north. Might as well have been 9 kilometers. Eagle 6, this is Renner. We are in a box. Say again. We are in a fixed kill box. Request immediate air support. Over. Static. He tried again. Static. Then a fragment. Weather window closed, unable to say again. And then nothing. The extraction bird was not coming. Renner looked north along the ravine floor. Ice, rock, men pinned behind whatever they had found to crouch behind. 2 of his element were already down. Not dead, but down. And in this cold, the difference between down and dead was measured in minutes. He keyed the radio one more time. If you were in that room when Whitlock pulled her name off that plan, you already know what this moment costs. Put it in the comments, the exact line where he lost the right to call it a clean operation. He got no answer. Tess heard it before she saw it. The sound a kill box makes is specific. It is not the sound of a firefight. Firefights are ragged, asymmetric, full of gaps. A kill box sounds like architecture, like something built. The echo pattern coming up from the ravine had structure. East wall, west wall, north suppression. Designed spacing. She had heard her grandfather describe the sound of a canyon closing around prey. The way every surface started talking at once. This was that sound. She moved to the glass without raising her profile above the shelf edge. 3,800 meters to the extraction point. Wind 6 knots northwest, unchanged. Temperature -21. Barometric pressure had dropped 2 millibars since she arrived. She had noted it on the range card, a small penciled number in the corner, because pressure drop at this altitude affects bullet flight at extreme distance, in ways that most range-trained snipers never encounter, and that she had learned the hard way on a hillside at age 16 with a bolt-action rifle and a caribou that taught her what a miscalculation costs. She found the first target in the scope. Eastern wall, second shelf from the top. A man in a firing position, weapon oriented down into the ravine, completely exposed from above and to the north, because whoever had designed the kill box had designed it against men coming from the south, not against a position that did not exist on any plan. She was not on any plan. She had not signed out. She was not there. The Barrett was cold against her cheek. She had already adjusted for the drop. The wind compensation was built into the hold. Not calculated in that moment, but carried in her hands from 11 years of shooting at distances that turned most rifles into noisemakers. She exhaled once. Slow. Complete. She had not even shown the proof yet. Hold on that. The shot broke at 0322. At 3,800 meters, a 50 BMG round from a Barrett M82 takes approximately 4.1 seconds to reach its target. During those 4.1 seconds, the shooter is already reading the trace. The faint disturbance in cold air that tells her whether the wind held, whether the compensation was right, whether the calculation built in 11 years of high-ground shooting was going to be confirmed or corrected. She did not need to correct. The man on the eastern shelf dropped without a sound reaching her. At that distance, sound traveled backward. She would hear the impact echo a full second after she had already seen the result. She marked the position, moved the glass 2 degrees left, found the second target, west wall, prone behind a rock shelf, the barrel of his weapon visible as a horizontal line against vertical stone. She fired again, 4.1 seconds. The horizontal line disappeared. In the ravine below, something changed. It was not immediate. The men pinned behind frozen rock did not know yet what was happening above them. Did not know that 2 of the positions that had them fixed were now empty. But the geometry of the kill box had shifted. The suppression from the east wall had a gap in it. A single gap. But a gap. Renner felt it before he understood it. He had been in enough firefights to feel when a volume of fire changes. Not just the count of rounds, but the pattern, the coverage, the intent behind it. Something on the eastern wall had stopped. He looked up along the ravine wall, trying to locate the change, trying to understand what had just happened in a box, with no exits and no air support, and a radio full of static. A third shot broke the silence from somewhere above the southern rim. The northern suppression position went quiet. Renner pressed his back against the rock and looked south, back down the ravine, into the dark, toward the rim that no one was supposed to be on. Here is the detail that changes everything. There was no muzzle flash visible from the ravine floor. At 3,800 meters in Alaskan darkness, there never would be. Whoever was shooting from a position that should not have existed, at a distance that should not have been possible, with a consistency that did not belong to improvisation. The kill box had a hole in it, and it was getting larger. The fourth shot came 90 seconds after the third, then the fifth, 2 minutes after that. The pattern was not random, and it was not reactive. It was methodical. The kind of methodical that comes from someone who has already calculated every position before the first round fires, who has already decided the sequence, who is working through a list built before the shooting started. Each shot landed in a different quadrant of the kill box. East wall, west wall, north shelf. The suppression architecture was being disassembled from the outside in, position by position, with the patience of someone who understood that patience at this distance was not a luxury, but a requirement. Renner had stopped trying to understand it and started using it. Element, this is Renner. Unknown overwatch is clearing our north. We move in 30 seconds on my mark. 2 columns, tight interval. Anybody goes down, you do not stop. Extraction point is 900 meters. We run it. No one argued. That was the thing about men who had been in kill boxes before. When a door opens, you do not stand in it asking questions about who built it. They moved at 0341. Renner took point on the left column. He kept his eyes north. On the extraction point, on the ice, on the rock walls sliding past. But in the back of his mind, he was counting the shots from above, counting the positions that had gone silent, counting the distance from the southern rim to where he stood, because the shot geometry was telling him something that his brain was not quite willing to accept yet. 3,000 meters. Minimum. Probably more. He had qualified as a sniper. He knew what was possible at that distance with a precision rifle and a trained shooter in ideal conditions. He also knew that the southern rim of a frozen Alaskan ravine at 0300 in February was not ideal conditions. It was the opposite of ideal conditions. It was the kind of conditions that turned 3,000-meter shots into theoretical exercises that instructors used to explain why certain distances were outside operational parameters. The sixth shot broke while he was running. He heard the impact ahead of him. North suppression, final position, the last gun that had been holding the extraction corridor closed. He heard it go quiet, the way a machine goes quiet when someone removes the part that makes it run. The corridor was open, read that again. The extraction point was 200 meters ahead, and there was nothing between them, and it but open ice and cold air, and the echo of 6 shots that had come from a position that did not exist on any plan that Commander Whitlock had signed. Renner reached the extraction point at 0354. 17 men on their feet, 4 down, 2 wounded, 2 dead. The bird was still not coming. The weather window was still closed. They pressed against the northern rock face, and Renner did the math that field commanders do when air is not an option. Distance to the secondary egress road. Condition of his wounded, temperature, time. He keyed the radio on the command frequency. Eagle 6, this is Renner. Element is at extraction. 2 KIA, 2 wounded, air is negative. We need ground extraction, secondary egress, over. This time the static had a gap in it. A voice came through, thin, compressed, the sound of a signal bouncing off weather. But a voice. Renner, confirm. Say again your status. We are showing 6 hostile positions neutralized on your grid. Origin unknown. Can you confirm origin of fire support? Renner looked south, down the ravine. Towards the dark rim he could not see from where he stood. Negative on origin, he said. An unknown overwatch. Fired from south rim. Minimum range estimate 3,800 meters. 6 confirmed neutralizations. Whoever it is, they are not in your system. Silence on the command frequency. Then, say again the range estimate. 3,800 meters, Renner said. Minimum. I have heard men go silent on a radio before. There is the silence of bad news arriving, and the silence of something that does not fit any category a man has been trained to process. This was the second kind. I recognized it the moment Renner spoke that number into the cold air. 3,800 meters, in those conditions, 6 for 6. The silence on the command frequency was not confusion. It was the sound of a certainty collapsing. Another silence. Longer. Then the voice came back. Different now. Stripped of the procedural tone. Just a man talking. Renner, do you have an ID on the asset? Renner thought about the southern rim, about the road that stayed open until 0145, about the thing he had said at the briefing room door and what it had actually meant. He pressed the transmit button. The asset's name is Tess Harlow, he said, and she was not supposed to be there. If this story is pulling you the way it pulled me when I first mapped it out, back the channel through the pinned comment. It's the fastest way to make sure the next one gets built. Commander Whitlock heard the transmission. He was standing in the ops room at Forward Operating Base Keller, a fictional designation, a converted warehouse with 4 flat-screen monitors and a satellite uplink that had been cutting in and out for 40 minutes because of the same weather system that had grounded the extraction bird. He had been watching the grid overlay with the kind of focused attention that men adopt when they have already decided an operation is under control and are waiting for the confirmation to arrive. The confirmation that arrived was not the one he had planned for. 6 hostile positions neutralized. Unknown origin. Southern rim. Range estimate 3,800 meters. He made the analyst repeat it. 3,800 meters. He looked at the grid. He looked at the southern rim marker on the overlay. The one that had been blank since he removed the name 11 hours ago. He looked at it the way a man looks at a door he locked from the outside when someone opens it from the inside. Who authorized a secondary overwatch asset? He said. The room did not answer because the room did not have an answer. Who authorized? He stopped himself. Looked at the analyst. Pull the sign-out logs for the southern access road. 0100 to 0145. The analyst pulled the logs. One entry, 0120. A Barrett M82, serial number logged, departed through the southern perimeter gate. Unsigned. The gate guard's notation in the margin, female, native, did not produce orders, said she was clearing equipment, waved through on assumption of authorization. Whitlock read the notation twice. The Barrett M82 in the corner of the briefing room, the one nobody had looked at, was gone. He looked at the screen, at the 6 neutralized positions, at the extraction point where 17 men were alive, who the geometry of that kill box had not intended to leave alive. He did not speak for 11 seconds. Think about what that means. A man who had called her a ghost story was now holding a log entry that proved the ghost had done the work that his entire certified, credentialed, formally authorized operation had failed to account for. The ghost had not needed his plan. The ghost had made her own, and she had not signed out. Renner gave the command frequency a full account at 0417. He did it standing against the northern rock face, with 2 wounded men on litters behind him, and the wind coming in off the Alaskan high ground at a temperature that made the radio housing creak in his grip. He did not editorialize. He did not frame it. He gave them the sequence the way a field man gives a sequence, in order, with precision, without decoration. 0314, contact, multiple positions, fixed kill box, east and west walls plus north suppression. 0322, first neutralization, eastern wall, position 2. 0324, second neutralization, western wall, position 1. 0330 through 0350. 4 additional neutralizations in sequence, consistent pattern, southern origin, no communication from the asset at any point. 0341. Element began movement toward extraction. 0354. Element reached extraction point. He paused. All 6 shots landed, he said. No misses, no corrections between shots. Consistent hold, consistent timing. Asset was operating without radio contact with the element, without updated target data from command, without a spotter. Another pause, at 3,800 meters, in a February Alaskan canyon, at 0300. He let that sit on the frequency for a moment. In the ops room, 2 analysts had stopped typing. Whitlock had not moved from the position he had been in when the log entry came up, standing behind the center console, one hand flat on the surface, the other holding the tablet he had used 11 hours ago to remove her name from the plan with a single tap of a red stylus. The senior analyst looked at Whitlock. Whitlock looked at the screen. Renner's voice came back one more time. I want to be clear about something for the record, he said. The asset was not in the plan. She was not authorized. She was not in the chain. She received no orders, no support, no communication from this command during the engagement. He let another second pass. She was there because she knew the ravine, and she was the only person in this operation who apparently understood what that knowledge was worth. The ops room was very quiet. Whitlock set the tablet down on the console. He set it down carefully, the way a man sets something down when he does not trust his hands to do it roughly, without the motion saying something he cannot take back. The polite version of this story skips this part. The version where a commander makes a difficult call under pressure and the outcome is ambiguous and everyone learns something and moves forward. That version exists. It is told often. It is not this story. She was still on the rim when the extraction bird finally came. The weather window had opened at 0440. She heard the rotors before she saw the lights. A distant mechanical pulse coming in from the northeast, dropping altitude, finding the corridor. She watched through the scope as the bird settled at the extraction point and the element loaded. 17 men moving. 4 on litters, the rotors throwing snow in flat arcs across the ice. She did not transmit. She watched Renner supervise the load, checking each man, counting, the systematic competence of a senior enlisted man who had done this enough times that the motion was built into his body. He looked south once, down the ravine, toward the rim. She was prone in the rock depression with the Barrett's bipod flat against the stone and her profile below the shelf edge, and she knew he could not see her, and she did not move. The bird lifted at 0511. She waited until the rotor sound was gone. Then she waited 4 more minutes. Then she began to break down the rifle. Bolt out, scope off. Bipod folded, each piece into the case in the sequence she had packed it 1,000 times, in the dark, by feel, because you do not use a light when you are on a rim that someone might still be watching. The range card, the fuel requisition form with the penciled calculations, the barometric pressure notation in the corner, the distance written at the top in her handwriting, 3,800 meters. She folded it once and slid it into the breast pocket of her jacket. She picked up the case and moved off the shelf. The cold was the same. The wind was the same. The ravine below was silent now. The killbox geometry dissolved. The positions empty. The ice on the floor undisturbed by anything except what had already happened there. She did not look back at the position. That is not a small thing. A position is just a place until you have shot from it. After that, it becomes something else. A fact, a record, a coordinate that exists in the world whether or not it exists in any document. She had shot from that shelf. The shots had landed. The men were alive. That was the complete transaction, and it did not require her to still be standing there when anyone came to measure it. She walked north along the rim road. The Barrett M82 was heavy on her shoulder. She did not mind the weight. They found the survivor at 0531. Not one of theirs, one of the ambush element, a man who had not fled with the others when the overwatch fire started coming in, who had instead pressed himself into a crevice in the eastern wall and stayed there while the 6 positions around him went silent one by one. A ground team running the secondary egress road found him hypothermic, non-combative, unable to stand without support. They brought him to the FOB at 0615. Renner was there when the debrief started. He was there because his element was still on the ground. The wounded were being stabilized, the dead were being prepared for transport. And because the kind of man Renner was, did not leave a debrief unattended when the debrief was about the operation that had just killed 2 of his people. The survivor talked for 40 minutes. He talked because he was cold and he was scared, and because the alternative, staying silent in a room full of men who had just watched 6 of his colleagues get neutralized by a shooter they could not see or locate, was worse than talking. He talked in the fragmented, half-coherent way of a man whose body temperature is still recovering, skipping between details, circling back, losing threads, and finding them again. But certain things came through clearly. The route. He knew the route. He knew it because it had been given to him. Not captured, not intercepted, not reverse engineered from observation, given. The timing of the insertion window, the composition of the element, the extraction point. The kill box coordinates had been designed around a specific route that the ambush team had received in advance from a source that was, in the survivors' words, inside the American planning structure. Renner sat very still. The analyst running the debrief looked up from his notes. The two men made eye contact. Neither of them said anything for a moment, because both of them were doing the same calculation, running backward through the operation, through the briefing, through the chain of people who had access to the route, the timing, the element composition. The list of people with that access was not long. Look at her hands, not the room. Whitlock was not in the debrief room. He had been in the ops room when the transmission came in, and after Renner's account went into the record, he had moved to his office, and no one had seen him come out. The analyst noted this. Renner noted it. Neither of them said his name yet, because in institutional environments, the name comes after the evidence is complete, not before. But the evidence was assembling itself with a logic that did not leave much room. The analyst's name was Figures. Specialist Aaron Figures, 26 years old, 18 months into his first overseas rotation. The kind of young man who had chosen intelligence work because he was precise by nature and believed precision protected people. He was the one who found it. Not the name. Not yet. The pattern. He had been running the access log for the operations planning file since 0630, pulling every credentialed entry, every timestamp, every download and transmission associated with the route data and the insertion window and the element composition. It was the kind of work that looks like nothing from the outside. A man at a screen, scrolling, cross-referencing. But that has a specific texture when something is wrong. A texture that Figures had been trained to recognize, and that he was recognizing now. The route data had been accessed 11 times during the 48 hours before insertion. 9 of those accesses were routine. Planners, analysts, the element commander, the aviation coordinator, logged, credentialed, expected. 1 access was Whitlock. Routine, expected. 1 access had no credential attached to it. A ghost entry. A session that had opened and closed inside a 4-minute window at 0200 the night before insertion. Routed through Whitlock's terminal login during a period when Whitlock's own access log showed him as inactive. His credentials. His terminal. A session he had not logged. Figures looked at the timestamp for 30 seconds without moving. Then he printed the log, folded it, and walked to the debrief room where Renner was still sitting across from the hypothermic survivor. He did not say anything. He set the printed log on the table in front of Renner and put his finger on the ghost entry and waited. Renner read it once, then again. Then he looked up at Figures. "Who else has seen this?" "No one," Figures said. "I came straight here." Renner looked at the survivor. Still wrapped in a thermal blanket, still staring at the middle distance, the particular exhaustion of a man who has said everything he knows and is now waiting to find out what it costs. Then Renner looked at the folded log. The name was not written on it. It did not need to be. The ghost entry pointed to 1 terminal, 1 credential set, 1 person with access to all 3 datasets, route, timing, element, during a window that matched the ambush geometry with the kind of precision that was not coincidence. That is not a small thing. The survivor had said inside the American planning structure, He had not known the name. He had not needed to. The log knew the name. The log had always known the name. Renner took the log to the senior officer on the fob at 0740. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Solis, the ranking officer present, operations deputy, the kind of woman who had spent 15 years being the most prepared person in every room she walked into, and who had learned that the preparation mattered most precisely when the room did not want to hear what she had prepared. She read the log in 90 seconds. She read it again in 60. Then she set it on her desk and looked at Renner with the expression of someone who has just seen a number that does not belong in a column and understands immediately what it means for everything downstream. "Where is Whitlock?" she said. "His office," Renner said, "has not come out since 0430. Solis picked up the log and stood. The walk from her office to Whitlock's took 40 seconds. Renner followed 2 steps behind. Figures stayed at the door. The corridor was bare. Poured concrete floor, overhead fluorescence, the particular institutional silence of a forward operating base at 0700, when the night element has come in and the day element has not yet fully assembled. Solis opened the door without knocking. Whitlock was at his desk. The tablet was in front of him. The same tablet, the same red stylus resting beside it. He looked up when the door opened, and whatever expression he had prepared for the moment someone came through, it did not quite assemble in time. His face went through 3 things in rapid succession: composure, calculation, and then something that was not either of those things. Solis set the log on the desk in front of him. She put her finger on the ghost entry, the same gesture Figures had used with Renner. And she did not say anything. She waited. Whitlock looked at the log. The fluorescent light above the desk made a faint buzz that was the only sound in the room for 11 seconds. If you want to know what institutional reckoning looks like in a room without cameras or witnesses, it looks like this: a man staring at a timestamp on a printed page, understanding that the timestamp does not care about his rank or his credentials or the 11 hours he spent building a clean operation. The timestamp is not interested in any of that. The timestamp has one job, and it has already done it. "I want a lawyer," Whitlock said. Solis looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. "That is why I brought the log instead of the MPs." She picked it back up. "You have 30 minutes." She walked out. Renner followed. The door closed behind them. If this kind of storytelling matters to you, help keep it moving through the pinned comment. Every episode gets built because this community shows up for it. The formal report was filed at 0900. Figures drafted it. Solis reviewed it. Renner signed it as the senior field witness. The document was 14 pages. Operational summary, contact report, asset performance assessment, access log analysis, and a single-page addendum that Renner wrote himself, in the particular direct prose of a man who has decided that precision is the only courtesy he owes a situation like this. The addendum had one subject. It named Tess Harlow as the sole Overwatch asset during the engagement. It listed her position: Southern Rim, LC-14 sector, grid reference included. It listed the range: 3,800 meters to the northern extraction point, confirmed by ballistic analysis of the neutralized positions. It listed the result: 6 hostile positions neutralized, 0 misses, engagement duration 28 minutes, 0 communication with the element or command during the engagement. It noted that she had not been authorized. It noted that she had not been in the plan. It noted that without her presence, the element's survival probability, given the killbox geometry and the failure of air support, was assessed by Renner as, and here he used a word that did not usually appear in formal military reports, but that figures left in when he drafted the document because it was the accurate word, negligible. Solis read the addendum twice. Then she looked at Renner. She came back, Solis said. No, Renner said. She left. Solis absorbed that. She looked at the addendum again. At the name, at the range, at the word negligible, sitting in the middle of a formal military document, like a stone dropped into still water. Find her, she said. Renner nodded. He already knew where to start looking. He knew the Southern Rim Road. He knew the gate log. He knew that a woman who had walked out of a briefing room with a Barrett M82 without signing out and had walked back in the direction of a perimeter road at 05 something in February in Alaska was either at the secondary vehicle depot or she was already gone. He suspected already gone. He was right. The vehicle depot log showed one entry at 0558. A field truck, engine running, signed out under a motorpool requisition number that corresponded to a maintenance rotation that had ended 2 days prior. The gate guard on the eastern perimeter noted the truck at 0604, headed north on the access road toward the highway junction. She had not stopped. She had not left a number or a frequency or a forwarding address. She had left the gate log and the motorpool entry and the Barrett serial number in the sign-out book at the southern checkpoint, written in the same small, tight hand she had used for the range card. And that was all. The hierarchy had recalculated. It had simply recalculated after she left the room. Renner drove the Southern Rim Road at 0940. He had checked the vehicle depot, the eastern gate, the secondary communications post at the base of the access road. Nothing. He drove north first, then doubled back, following the logic of a woman who had come from somewhere and was going back to it. Not fleeing, not hiding, simply done with a place that had already finished needing her. He stopped at the southern checkpoint. The gate guard, a young corporal who had been on shift since midnight, confirmed the truck at 0604, headed north. She had not said anything when she left, had not asked for anything, had handed over the Barrett serial number written on the back of a gate pass, and walked to the truck and driven away the way a person drives away from a place that owes them nothing and knows it. Renner looked at the serial number on the gate pass. Then he looked at the checkpoint shelf, the narrow counter where drivers signed out equipment and the guards logged departures. Sitting on the corner of the shelf, weighted by a spent brass casing from a 50 BMG round, was the range card. The fuel requisition form, folded once. Her handwriting on the back, the calculations, the wind notation, the barometric correction, the distance written at the top in pencil, small and tight and exact, 3,800 bid. He picked it up, unfolded it, read it the way you read something that was never meant for you, but was left where you would find it, because there was no one else to leave it for. The numbers were clean. The logic was complete. Every adjustment accounted for, every variable named, the kind of range card that a trained military sniper produces after hours of preparation with equipment and support and a spotter calling conditions. She had done it alone. in the dark, on a rim road she had found herself. I have very little patience for systems that confuse the credential for the competence. I have watched that confusion cost things that cannot be recovered. I watched it cost 2 men their lives in a ravine that the right preparation might have made survivable. I am not saying that with anger. I am saying it with the particular clarity that comes from standing at the end of a chain of decisions and being able to see exactly where it broke. Renner folded the range card and put it in his breast pocket. He stood at the checkpoint for a moment. The Alaskan morning had come in flat and white, the kind of light that makes distance disappear. Everything equally far, equally cold, equally indifferent to what had happened in the dark a few hours before. She was gone. The Barrett's serial number was on the gate pass. The range card was in his pocket. The spent brass casing sat on the checkpoint shelf where she had left it as a weight or a marker, or simply the last physical evidence that she had been there at all. He did not put the brass casing down. Solis put the addendum on Whitlock's desk at 1000. Not for him to read. He had already read it. She put it there because the MPs had arrived at 1000, and the procedure required that the subject of an investigation have the relevant documentation present when the formal notification was delivered. A bureaucratic courtesy that existed, Renner suspected, less for the subject's benefit than for the records. Whitlock sat behind the desk and looked at the addendum without touching it. The MPs stood at the door. Solis stood at the window. Renner stood in the corridor and watched through the open door because no one had told him to leave, and he was not the kind of man who left a thing unfinished. The room was very quiet. The addendum was 14 pages plus the single page Renner had written. The last page of the main document contained the asset performance assessment, the 6 neutralizations, the range, the engagement duration, the word negligible. Below that, in the formatted field for asset identification, was a name, Tess Harlow. Field asset, informal designation, no active credentials, no assigned unit, no authorized presence. And below that, in the remarks field, a line that figures had drafted and Solis had left exactly as written. Asset performance exceeded all documented operational parameters for the engagement type. Asset presence was not authorized. Asset presence was determinative. Whitlock looked at the word determinative for a long time. The red stylus was on the desk beside the tablet. The same stylus he had used 11 hours ago to remove her name from the plan. He did not touch it. He looked at it once, a brief involuntary look, the kind that happens before the conscious mind can stop it, and then looked back at the addendum. The MPs stepped forward. Renner watched Whitlock stand. He watched the tablet and the stylus stay on the desk. He watched the man who had called her a ghost story walk out of the room between 2 MPs in the particular silence of an institutional corridor at 1000 on a February morning. A silence that was not dramatic and was not theatrical and was more final than either of those things, because it was simply procedural. The sound of a system correcting itself, slowly, imperfectly, but with a permanence that did not require anyone's approval to take effect. The addendum stayed on the desk. The last word on the last page was determinative. The red stylus lay beside the tablet that had removed her name from the plan. Nobody picked either of them up for a long time. The surviving members of the element were told at 1100. Solis convened them in the main briefing room, the same room where the operation had been planned. where the route had been confirmed, where the overwatch marker had been removed with a tap of a red stylus. The room had not changed. The screen was the same screen. The table was the same table. But the 17 men who sat in it had come from a ravine that had been designed to kill them. And they brought that knowledge into the room with them, the way you bring cold in on your clothes, not visible but present, felt by anyone who paid attention. Solace did not make a speech. She walked them through the addendum, the 6 positions, the range, the engagement duration. She read Renner's single-page assessment aloud, the way a document gets read when the author is in the room and the content does not require embellishment. She read the word negligible and did not pause on it. She read the asset identification field, the name, the informal designation, the no authorized presence. And she read the remarks field last. Asset performance exceeded all documented operational parameters. Asset presence was determinative. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms are quiet when 17 people are all thinking the same thing, and none of them have decided yet whether to say it. One of the SEALs, a petty officer second class named Avery, one of the 2 who had been wounded and was sitting with his left arm in a field dressing, raised his hand. "Where is she?" he said. "We don't know," Solace said. Avery nodded slowly. He looked at the table, then at the screen, then back at the table. The field dressing on his arm was the color of old snow, white going grey at the edges, the particular palette of field medicine applied in cold conditions. He had been in the ravine. He had been pinned behind a frozen rock with the geometry of the kill box tightening around him, and the radio full of static, and the temperature dropping, and 2 of his people already down. He knew what negligible meant in personal terms. "Then somebody should find her," he said, "before this gets filed and forgotten." Nobody disagreed. If this episode pulled you in, if that room stayed with you, leave your take in the comments. Tell me the moment it shifted for you. The investigation opened formally at 1400 on the same day. Not the after-action review. That was already running, had been running since Solace received the log. The formal investigation, the one with a case number and a jurisdiction designation and a chain of custody for the printed access log that figures had carried from the analytics station to the debrief room that morning, folded without a cover sheet, the way consequential things sometimes travel in institutional environments, quietly, by hand, from one person who understands what it means to the next. The case number went to the Judge Advocate's office at the IFOB. From there, it went up the chain. From there, within 72 hours, because the nature of the evidence and the rank of the subject required it, it went to the Department of Justice Liaison, assigned to the theatre. The route data, the insertion window, the element composition, the ghost entry on Whitlock's terminal, the survivor's testimony, the kill box geometry mapped against the transmitted intelligence. The chain was not complicated once you could see it whole. It was the kind of chain that is obvious in retrospect and invisible in advance, which is the only way these things survive long enough to do damage. Whitlock was removed from his position at 1600. Not arrested. Not yet. Suspended pending investigation. Relieved of command authority. Confined to quarters with an MP outside the door. The formal language of institutional discipline, applied with the procedural care of a system that moves slowly and lands hard. His name did not appear in any external communication for 11 days. Tess Harlow's name did not appear in any external communication either. That is not the same silence. Whitlock's silence was the silence of containment, of a system managing the exposure of its own failure with the particular care that institutions apply to failures that implicate people inside the institution. His name was being kept quiet because the investigation required it, and because the people above him needed time to calculate their own distance from his decisions. Her silence was different. Her silence was the silence of a person who had done a thing and left, who had not asked for the record to reflect her presence, who had written her name in a gate log and a motor pool requisition, and left a spent brass casing on a checkpoint shelf and driven north on a frozen access road before the world had finished deciding what to do with what she had done. The investigation subpoenaed 17 witnesses. Tess Harlow was not among them. Figures noticed this. He flagged it to Solis in a brief email. 3 sentences, no attachment. The kind of communication that asks a question without using a question mark. Solis read it again, and forwarded it up the chain with a single added line. This asset's contribution was determinative. Her absence from the witness list requires explanation. She received no response for 4 days. The response came on day 5, not to Solis, to Figures, a single paragraph from a JAG officer 2 levels above the phobie, with a case reference number and a procedural citation, and the particular bureaucratic texture of a communication that has been reviewed by 3 people before it was sent. The paragraph said that the asset in question had not been an authorized participant in the operation, that her presence had not been sanctioned by the chain of command, and that the formal investigation would focus on authorized participants and credentialed personnel in accordance with standard evidentiary procedure. Figures read it twice. Then he walked to Solis's office and set it on her desk, the same way he had set the access log on the debrief table, without comment, finger on the relevant line, waiting. Solis read the paragraph. She looked at the case reference number. She looked at the procedural citation. She looked at the phrase authorized participants and credentialed personnel, and understood with the clarity of someone who had been inside institutional systems long enough to read their grammar fluently, exactly what the paragraph was doing. It was not excluding Tess Harlow because she was irrelevant. It was excluding her because including her, naming her formally in the investigation record, establishing her contribution in the legal documentation, would require the investigation to also establish why she had not been authorized, who had removed her from the plan, and what that removal had made possible. The investigation did not want that question in the record. The investigation was about Whitlock's ghost entry, his terminal, his transmitted data. It was not, the paragraph made clear, going to be about the overwatch position that had not existed on any plan and had saved 17 men anyway. I have watched institutions protect themselves this way before. I have watched the system draw a circle around what it is willing to examine and leave the most important thing just outside the line. It is not malice most of the time. It is the particular cowardice of bureaucratic self-preservation, the decision to solve the problem that is manageable and file the problem that is not. I do not admire it. I do not think it deserves admiration, but I understand the geometry of it, which is almost worse. Solis wrote back to the JAG officer that same afternoon. Her response was longer than a paragraph. It included the addendum, Renner's single-page assessment, the ballistic analysis of the 6 neutralized positions, and the gate log entry with the range card notation. It asked, in the formal language of an official filing, that the record reflect the asset's contribution and that the evidentiary scope of the investigation be reviewed. She copied Renner. She copied figures. She did not copy anyone above the JAG officer. She was not bluffing. She was building a record of her own, a parallel documentation that existed alongside the official investigation, and that would outlast whatever the official investigation decided to do with the paragraph it had sent. Whitlock, meanwhile, had not spoken publicly since the MPs walked him out of his office. His access credentials had been suspended. His terminal, the terminal with the ghost entry, had been imaged and sealed. The red stylus was in an evidence bag. The tablet with a blank southern rim marker was in a second evidence bag next to it. Renner drove north on the Highway Junction Road on day 6, not on orders, on the kind of decision a man makes when the institutional process has made clear what it intends to do. And he has decided that the institutional process is not the only process available to him. He had the range card in his breast pocket, had kept it there since the checkpoint, had not filed it, had not submitted it as evidence, had not done anything with it except carry it the way you carry something that does not belong in a file, yet because you do not know whose hands it should reach. He had one lead: the motor pool requisition Tess had used to sign out the truck, traced to a maintenance rotation that had ended 2 days before the operation. The rotation had been run out of a secondary depot 40 kilometers north of the FOB, at a junction town that served the high ground access roads, a fuel stop, a repair bay, a small permanent staff. The truck had not been returned. The maintenance depot had logged it as overdue at 0800 on day 2, and had not escalated the report, because the depot supervisor, a master sergeant named Coles, had cross-referenced the vehicle number against the FOB logs and seen the gate entry from 0604, and assumed the truck was caught up in whatever had happened at the FOB that night. The depot was 40 kilometers of frozen highway. Renner made it in 35 minutes. The truck was there, parked at the far end of the depot lot, engine cold, keys in the ignition. Renner walked around it once. No damage. Full tank. She had refueled it before returning it, which he noted because it was the kind of detail that said something about a person without saying it out loud. Master Sergeant Coles met him at the depot office door. "She leave anything?" Renner asked. Coles thought for a moment. Then he went inside and came back with a folded piece of paper, a depot maintenance form, the kind with carbon copies used for logging vehicle returns. On the back, in pencil, in the same small tight handwriting, "Truck returned full. No damage. Thank you for the rotation logs." No name, no number, no forwarding address. Renner stood in the depot lot and looked at the handwriting for a long moment. The Alaskan morning was the same flat white it had been at the checkpoint 2 days earlier. The light that makes everything equally far, the cold that does not negotiate. He looked north along the highway. The road went for a long time before it turned. He did not know where she had gone after the depot. He did not know if she had gone north or turned off on one of the high ground access roads that branched from the junction. The roads that went up into the terrain she knew better than anyone who had been in that briefing room. He did not know if she had a destination or was simply moving the way a person moves when a place has finished needing them. He put the depot form in his pocket with the range card. He stood there for another minute. Then he drove back to the fob, because the institutional process was still running and he was still a witness, and there were things that needed to be on the record even when the record was slow and imperfect and occasionally cowardly about what it chose to examine. The myth had already started without him. He knew this because Avery had told him the night before. Quietly, in the corridor outside the medical bay, while Avery was waiting for a dressing change on the arm wound, that the number was moving through the element, that men who had been in the ravine were telling men who had not been in the ravine that the number, 3,800 meters, 6 for 6, no spotter, no authorization, no radio contact, was being repeated with the particular precision that soldiers use when they are passing along a fact they want to make sure survives. That is how it starts. Not with a document, not with a ceremony, with a number, passed between people who were there, told to people who were not, repeated until it becomes part of the permanent record that exists in human memory before it exists anywhere else. The photograph appeared on day 9. No one knew who had taken it. That was the first thing people said when it started moving. Not what it showed, but that no one knew the source. It had come from somewhere on the southern rim, taken in the dark with whatever optic had been available, the image grainy and compressed and shot at an angle that suggested the photographer had been below and to the west, catching the shelf from a position that gave a partial profile. It showed a woman prone behind a Barrett M82. The shelf of rock, the bipod flat against the stone, the rifle oriented north along the ravine corridor, the figure behind it, small in the frame, the canyon darkness around her, the flat Alaskan sky beginning to grey at the eastern edge in the way that February mornings in Alaska begin, reluctantly, without warmth. You could not see her face. You could see the rifle. You could see the position. You could see the scale of the canyon below her. And if you knew what you were looking at, you could estimate the distance to the extraction point from the angle and the terrain, and arrive at a number that matched the number that was already moving through the element by word of mouth. Avery had it first. He showed Renner. Renner looked at it for a long time without speaking, which was answer enough. The image went through the element the way the number had gone through it, quietly, person to person, with the specific care that people use when they are passing something that they understand is not theirs to broadcast, but that they cannot bring themselves not to share. By day 11, it was in 3 other units on the OFOB. By day 14, it had reached a naval station 400 kilometers south. No caption, no name, no unit. Just the image, the woman, the rifle, the shelf, the dark, and the number that travelled with it like a shadow. 3,800 meters, 6 for 6, no authorization, no radio. If you want this channel to keep building stories with this kind of weight and this kind of detail, help keep it alive in the pinned comment. That is where it matters most. By day 20, the photograph had a name attached to it, though no one was sure where the name had come from either. Tess Harlow. It fit the image the way names sometimes fit things retroactively. Not because someone had verified it in that moment, but because the name and the image and the number together made a complete thing. A thing with edges, and the mind closes around complete things and holds them. She did not know the photograph existed. She was already gone. The closed file was sealed on day 31. The formal investigation concluded with Whitlock's indictment on charges of unauthorized transmission of classified operational data. The legal language for what the ghost entry had done, what the survivor had described, what the kill box geometry had confirmed. The indictment was 14 counts. The trial was set for the following year. The outcome, everyone who read the file understood, was not in serious doubt. The operational record was compiled alongside the legal file, a separate document, administrative rather than judicial, the kind of record that lives in classified archives and is reviewed by people with specific clearances for specific purposes and is otherwise invisible to the world that exists outside those clearances. Figures compiled it. Solis had asked him to, formally in writing, with a case reference number and a scope definition, which was her way of making sure the compilation itself was on the record and could not later be characterized as unofficial or unauthorized. Figures spent 4 days on it. He was precise by nature. He was more precise than usual this time, because he understood that precision in a document that would be sealed and classified was the only form of precision that mattered. The kind that existed not to be read today, but to be found later, by someone who needed to know what had actually happened. The document named 6 neutralized positions. It named the range. It named the engagement duration. It named the asset. In the field for asset identification, Figures had written Tess Harlow, informal field asset, no assigned unit, no active credentials, no authorized presence at the time of engagement. And then, in the remarks field, the same line from the addendum carried forward unchanged. Asset performance exceeded all documented operational parameters for the engagement type. Asset presence was determinative. He submitted the draft to Solis at 1700 on day 30. She read it that night. In the morning she sent it back with 2 changes. Both minor, both clarifications, neither of them touching the name or the remarks field. And a single line at the bottom of her response. File as submitted. The record should say what happened. Figures filed it at 0900 on day 31. The closed file was sealed at 1400. There was one problem. In the asset identification field, the name had been entered into the official record system by an administrative clerk who had transcribed it from Renner's handwritten addendum, and the clerk had misread the handwriting. The name in the official system read T. Harlan, not Harlow, Harlan, 1 letter off, 1 misread pencil stroke in a handwritten document produced at 0900 on a February morning by a man who had been awake for 30 hours and whose handwriting, even at its best, was the handwriting of a field man rather than a clerk. The closed file was sealed with the wrong name. Figures found the error on day 33. He had been doing a final cross-reference, the kind of compulsive review that precise people do after a document is filed, not because they expect to find anything, but because the alternative is not checking, and not checking was not something Figures had learned how to do. He pulled the official system entry against his draft. He read the name field. He read it again. T. Harlan. He sat with it for a moment. The file was sealed. Correcting a sealed classified file required a formal amendment request, a supervisor signature, a case reference update, a notification to the JAG office, and a processing window of 10 to 15 business days. It was not complicated. It was simply slow and bureaucratic and entirely dependent on someone deciding that a one-letter error in the name field of a classified document about an unauthorized asset in a closed investigation was worth the paperwork. Figures decided it was worth the paperwork. He drafted the amendment request that afternoon. He walked it to Solis's office. She read the relevant field, looked at his draft, and signed it without comment. The signature of a person for whom the decision required no deliberation, because the answer had been obvious before the question was finished. He filed the amendment at 1600 on day 33. The processing window was 10 to 15 business days. I have thought about that window many times since I mapped this story. 10 to 15 business days for a name, one letter, one misread pencil stroke. 10 to 15 days. To correct it in a file that the person it belonged to did not know existed and would likely never read. I am not angry about the window. The system moves at the speed it moves, and the correction was filed, and the correction would land. I think about what it means that the most important act of recognition in this entire record, the one that said her name correctly, in a sealed document, in a classified file that no ceremony would announce and no crowd would witness, was filed by a 26-year-old specialist who had been awake for most of 33 days and who did it because not checking was not something he had learned how to do. That is the kind of person who keeps the record honest. The amendment was processed on day 44. The name in the official system was corrected to Tess Harlow. She did not know. The ravine was empty by the time anyone went back to look at it. A terrain assessment team ran the Southern Rim Road on day 47. Standard post-operation survey. Documentation of the engagement positions. Ballistic confirmation for the investigation record. They climbed to the shelf where the overwatch had been. They found the rock depression. They found the bipod marks in the stone. 2 small parallel compressions in the surface frost, preserved by the cold the way cold preserves things in Alaska, indifferently, without judgment, simply because the temperature had not risen enough to erase them. They found nothing else, no brass. She had policed her brass before she left, had picked up every spent casing except the one she had left on the checkpoint shelf as a wait for the range card. The team noted this in their report. They noted it because it was unusual. A shooter under no obligation to clean a position she had never officially occupied had cleaned it anyway, with the particular thoroughness of someone who had been taught that a position is not yours to leave until it looks like you were never there. The team lead stood on the shelf and looked north along the ravine. 3,800 meters to the extraction point. He had read the number in the ballistic report, standing on the shelf, looking through a spotting scope at the extraction point as a reference. He understood the number differently than he had understood it on paper. On paper, it was a distance. On the shelf, it was a decision. A decision made in the dark, in February, without a spotter, without authorization, without radio contact, with a wind that came in from the northwest at 6 knots, and a temperature that turned most precision shooting into theoretical exercise. He stood there for a long time. Then he wrote in his report, "Position consistent with all ballistic data. Engagement geometry confirmed. No recoverable evidence of asset identity beyond bipod impressions, and one spent .50 BMG casing recovered at secondary checkpoint, day 1. He looked north one more time. The ravine was quiet. The ice on the floor had not changed. The walls were the same frozen stone they had been on the night the kill box had been built, and the night it had been taken apart from above by a shooter who was not supposed to be there. The cold did not have an opinion about any of it. Renner wrote the final field report on day 52. It was not required. The formal investigation had its record. The operational archive had its sealed file, corrected on day 44 to read Tess Harlow. The after-action review had been completed and filed and distributed to the relevant commands. There was nothing that the institutional process needed from Renner that it did not already have. He wrote it anyway. He wrote it in the particular prose of a man who has spent 21 years producing documents for institutions and has learned exactly how much of a thing an institution can hold and how much of a thing requires a different container. The formal record could hold the facts, the positions, the range, the engagement duration, the word determinative. What it could not hold in the language of formal military documentation was the rest of it. The briefing room, the stylus, the blank marker, the Barrett in the corner that nobody looked at, the road open until 01:45, the fuel requisition form with the penciled calculations, the barometric correction, the distance written at the top in a hand that had learned its precision from a hillside at age 16. He started with the briefing room. He wrote it in sequence, the way a field man writes sequence, in order without decoration, letting the facts carry the weight, because field men learn early that facts carry more weight than language when the language is trying too hard. He wrote about the overwatch marker and the name on it and the tap of the red stylus. He wrote about the Barrett in the corner and nobody looking at it. He wrote about the road that stayed open until 01:45 and the thing he had said at the door and what it had actually meant. He wrote about the kill box, about the geometry, about the radio full of static, about the sound a volume of fire makes when it changes, not just the count of rounds, but the pattern, the coverage, the intent. And the moment he had felt that change from behind a frozen rock wall and looked south into the dark and understood, before he had confirmed it, what the change meant. He wrote about the extraction point and the bird and the load and the men on litters. He wrote about the range card on the checkpoint shelf, weighted by a spent brass casing. Then he wrote the last paragraph. What happened in that ravine on the morning of the operation was not an improvisation. It was preparation applied in the absence of authorization. The asset understood the terrain, calculated the engagement, and executed under conditions that the formal plan had not accounted for, and that the formal plan, as designed, could not have survived. She was not in the chain. She was not credentialed. She was not authorized. She was also the only reason 17 members of this element are alive to read this report. I am aware that the record will reflect her presence as unauthorized. I am filing this report so that the record also reflects what unauthorized presence in this case actually meant. He signed it, dated it day 52, filed it under his own name in his own service record, where it would live alongside 21 years of other documents produced for institutions that could hold facts but not always the full weight of what the facts meant. If this story has stayed with you the way it has stayed with me, if that last paragraph landed the way I think it landed, help keep this channel building at this level through the pinned comment. It is the fastest and most direct way to make the next one possible. The Barrett M82 did not go back into a corner. The serial number had been logged at the southern checkpoint on the morning she left. The rifle had been retrieved by the FOB Armory at 0800 on day 1, collected from the checkpoint shelf where she had left it with the gate log entry and nothing else. It was inspected, cleaned, recatalogued, standard procedure for a weapon returned outside normal sign-out protocols. The armourer who processed it was a staff sergeant named Tate. He had been on base for 8 months. He had not been at the briefing. He had not been in the ravine. He knew about the operation the way people on a FOB know about things that happened. Through the number that was moving through the units, through the photograph that had reached the Armory Bay by day 12, through the particular quality of silence that settles over a small institutional community when something has happened that the community does not yet have formal language for. He processed the rifle by the book, logged the serial number, noted the round count from the magazine, 6 rounds expended, consistent with the engagement record, noted the condition of the barrel, noted the scope adjustment settings, which he did not reset, because something stopped him from resetting them. Not policy, not procedure, just the particular hesitation of a man who understands that the settings on that scope represent a calculation that was correct at 3,800 meters in the dark in February with a 6-knot crosswind, and that resetting them would be a small erasure of something that had earned the right to stay. He tagged the rifle with its serial number and its return date and its condition assessment. Then he added 1 line to the tag in his own handwriting, which was not standard procedure, and which he did not explain to anyone who later asked about it. The line read, 3,800 meters, 6 for 6. The Barrett went into the rack. Other rifles came and went. The Barrett stayed, not because anyone ordered it to stay, because no one ordered it moved, and because the armory staff developed, without discussing it, a collective reluctance to reassign a rifle that had that tag on it. Months later, a new armourer asked Tate about the tag. Tate explained what the numbers meant. The new armourer read the tag and put the rifle back in the rack without another word. That is how objects become more than objects. Not by ceremony, not by official designation, by the accumulated weight of people who know what the numbers mean, passing that knowledge to the next person, until the knowledge is older than the people carrying it, and the object has become what the culture needs it to be. The Barrett M82 with the serial number from Tess Harlow's gate log entry stayed in that rack for 3 years. The range card was found in Renner's service file 14 months after the operation. Not by Renner, by a junior analyst processing retirement paperwork. Renner had put in his papers on day 91, 21 years and 4 months of service, and the processing of those papers required a review of his personal filed documents. The analyst found the fuel requisition form folded once in a manila envelope, marked only with the operation's case reference number. She unfolded it, read it again. The penciled handwriting, the calculations, the wind notation, the barometric correction in the corner, small and tight, the work of someone who understood that pressure drop at altitude affects bullet flight in ways that most range-trained shooters never encounter. And at the top, in the same hand, the distance. 3,800 meters. The analyst flagged it as a loose document requiring disposition. She listed it in the inventory. She noted the name Field on the envelope, the case reference, no personal name, and cross-referenced it against the operation's closed file. The closed file had a name in it: Tess Harlow, Asset Presence Determinative. The analyst held the range card and the closed file cross-reference for a moment. She was 24 years old. She had not been in Alaska. She had not been in the briefing room or the ravine or the checkpoint or the depot 40 kilometers north. She knew the name from the file and the number from the tag on the Barrett in the Armory Bay, which she had walked past every week for 7 months, and which she had asked about once, early on, when the tag was new to her. She knew what the numbers meant. She looked at the range card for a long time, at the calculations, at the barometric correction, at the distance written at the top in a pencil by a woman who had done this alone, in the dark, on a rim that was not on any plan, and who had left the card on a checkpoint shelf weighted by a spent brass casing because there was no one else to leave it for. She did not refile it in the manila envelope. She placed it in a document sleeve, acid-free archival grade, the kind used for materials that need to survive longer than the people who created them, and she logged it as a primary source document associated with the closed operational file, with a note in the disposition field that read, "Retain permanently. Original field calculation by named asset. See operational record." She signed the log entry with her name and her date and her analyst designation. Then she went back to the retirement paperwork. Outside, the Alaskan winter was doing what Alaskan winters do, indifferently, without ceremony, with the particular permanence of cold that does not need anyone's acknowledgement to continue being true. The range card was in the archive. The Barrett was in the rack. The name was in the file. And somewhere north of the highway junction, on one of the high ground access roads that branch off toward terrain that most people have no reason to know, and that she had known since she was old enough to read a hillside, Tess Harlow was in a landscape that had always been honest with her. She had not needed the record to know what she had done. The record, finally, knew her name.